Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. Feedback is most important. Feel free to reach out to me. 2 ways to do this. Email, of course, is always appreciated and get immediate response for that. But comments on YouTube is highly appreciated. And then also the last, as a companionship to what I talk about on Fridays, I posted a short little video about what my commentary, my thoughts on animation and the state of animation today. And it's got a quiz on there. So if you like things like that, go and check that out. And I'll link it, and so y'all can check that out and give me thoughts, because I greatly appreciate what you all think, and all the comments really help with the development and the growth of this podcast. I like to consider it as a radio show, but it really helps everything. Okay, so word of mouth also helps. You have a friend, co-worker, what have you, loved one, and you think that, hey, this is their cup of tea, go share it with them. Tell them about it, the Harboring Light. Okay, so on to the topic of choice. Now, I'm going to give my thoughts about the aspects of the first comic book that is well established, that, it's interesting with this one. I'm not going to go into too depth in this intro about it. That's what the show is for. About the variations of how comic books are considered, especially with this particular, the first, comic book. And then on Wednesday, I'm going to give more commentary on my thoughts on comic books. And I touched on this some time back, and I'm just going to reiterate it, because I think comic books is in itself very fascinating in its place in American culture and then abroad. With that said, let's jump right into the pages of it. Okay, so let's jump right into the aspects of it. Now, I initially, when I was talking about French literature, right, this came into my path about the aspects of this particular, where it's really considered internationally one of the first comic books, and then we reiterate the focus into American comic books, because American comic books and America in general really crafted comic books and made it well into its own outside of manga with that. Alright, so let's jump right to it. So Mr. Obadiah Oldbuck is the adventures of Mr. Obadiah Oldbuck is loosely based upon the history de Monsieur. Forgive me with the notifications going on in the background. Mr. Forgive me for the French here. I'll do my very best with pronunciation of this. Viox Bowles in 1837 by Randolph Topher. Now, this went through a lot of different variations of altering and everything else with it, and it's considered the consensus is that it's the first comic book in the way in which the alliteration, the drawings are in the panels, and then it has something you would say to the consistencies and the consensus of thought bubbles, which you would typically see in a comic book when they're conversing with each other. But what what is very interesting is the subject matter in which the Obadiah O book is following. It goes along the aspects of first it centers around a man who is very much going through inner turmoil, to the point it goes into very graphic and well, to each his own with that, but it goes into very sensitive, and that can be a whole thing with depending on with the aspects of how that is seen and presented. But the subject matter is not cute. Is graphic, and graphic in the sense of it goes into the depths of the aspects of, which I don't understand why you can't have conversations on YouTube, adult conversations, when that's a, when it's I market my channel is for adults. I happen to have some, I have family friendly content for the most part. For the most part, this is centered around adults. But anyway, with the aspects of ending one's life, unfortunately, by yourself. If y'all get the point of what I'm saying. So, and it is, and the way in which that is centered around is, from what I understand now, at this time period, we're going through the transitions of the aspects of naturalism, with a literary concept of that, and romanticism with the literary concepts of that. Now, why am I bringing up these subject matters here? Now, these two subject matters center around the house of French literature, specifically, when we get to naturalism, but, a little bit with romanticism and the aspects of that, and everything else of saying once I'm not that. This is what I'm picking up from that interpretation of this comic book. It's okay. Let me get back to this. It's another interpretation in the midst in which this mentality of no matter what you do, no matter how the prizes, accolades you have, something is still against you, right? And I think that this particular and the means in which it's represented is an ensemble to that piece of, what was reiterated again with the literary philosophies of naturalism and the French sort of aspects of this bleak disdain sort of mentality of the ways in which they saw the moralities and the movements of modern life, And so it's really interesting when you turn and you look and you think about the concepts of comic books and its disposition. Alright, so the concept of interpersonal relationships, and when this is the archetype and the as I was saying about the let me go back, the Obadiah O book, right? It also goes in the aspects of what will you do in order to, reiterate your situations of what you're dealing with. Because it all, not on top of love and love loss, it goes in the aspects of, offering oneself. Goes into the list of talking about robbery, imprisonment, a missing person, and then the aspects of monks, the aspects of pastoral living, and all of these things. Now, these concepts also in itself are the foundations in which to a variation, a lot of different comic books center itself around the aspects talking about robbery, right? Robbery and crime and seediness. We got the Dick Tracy's comic books. You got, you could say Batman in itself. That a lot of that premise in Batman with the depending on how you look at it, has to do with crime and thievery and all these kind of things. And the aspects of spiritual, with the monk and being disillusioned with spirituality, and having that interlaced in this. Those concepts are very prevalent in a lot of American modern comic books, and then specifically when we get into manga and the aspects of Eastern philosophy, right? And some Western, but specifically mainly Eastern philosophy, okay? And then pastoral living, all right? So pastoral living, let's ruminate a lot about the aspects of being one with the concept of nature. Like, what are we? What are we looking at in front of us, and how are we living? What is our disposition in nature? Because most of the time, when these things are presented, when we see it from an artistic point of view, where it be literature, where it be a different form of the arts, or where it be in paintings or drawings or in movies, depending on what the person who is creating this, where they want to take this artistically. Most of the time, the concept is centered around the aspects of what kind of feelings do I have about nature, and what does that mean to me, whether it be good or bad, whether it be romanticized in the aspects of longing and belonging, nostalgia, because a lot of time, most of that with romanticism. Now I'm really merely seeing it from my point of view in the aspects of the literary style and the concepts of it that had to do with the belonging of something, of where it should be, and that's where you're getting into the territory of nostalgia here. However, the first comic book, as the consensus is in America, it's not traced to one single author. So it is actually entitled The Fortunes of Ferdinand Flipper, and it's an episodic tale of birth, employment, romance, fortune, and death. As they say in Death of a Salesman, particularly, And this is an insinuation of that. That old adage of, you can depend on things in life, and those are one of them. With the aspects of, birth, education, employment, romance, and fortune, and then in death. And also, the aspects of it being rambling, it's very interesting because, when you ramble, pretty much it's somebody that's just very incoherent in the way in which they're expressing something. And that to me innates the aspects of soliloquies, right? And then, Shakespeare in itself, his work was the one to pinpoint these things out. So, people, having these thoughts and speaking out loud, right? And then that's very interesting to express that it's rambling for the point of the aspects of having soliloquy. To me, that's how I interpreted that. Like if that's my point of view of it, and that's setting up the process of reiterating, like taking what was already said with the aspect done with the Obadiah Old Book, and just giving a different spin on it, which is a lot of things that are really popular do that. Even the Bible, there is notations of things being reiterated and just regurgitated, and it's being discounted because it's something that happened after the fact and not being a part of the Bible, because it's not actually proven that this, when you look back at it, that it was actually in the time of Jesus and then the time of the Old Testament, something way after, or, so forth. And that could be and it's just interesting how, something that is so profound and so uplifting, or something that is so meaningful that has been accounted for, and then, people having and I think that's what was going on with the aspects of the fortunates of Ferdinand and Flipper, that, seeing something that's already been done and then reinterpreting that. Like this concept of reinterpreting something that has a profound effect on culture is really nothing new. But getting back to the point here, I just think it was simply rambling, for the sake of, setting it up for a means to have thought bubbles, like, something like a soliloquy. Like, this is expected for people to kind of understand, or it's one of those things to understand the audience too, and the context and time and the circumstance. Maybe the person who was originally wrote this or made this, that's what they were intending. That was something that was already implied, depending on the historical context and the audience, that, to look at it like that, this was laying down the foundation of having a soliloquies there. This is just long soliloquy, and that's why it's rambling like that. And then leading down the road of, comic books really taking shape and taking form into its own, and then having a consensus of, okay, well, let's take it to another level, and having the placement, which thought bubbles are very, prevalent and precise and concise in these comics. And it's also interesting too how things develop and become its own when people think after the fact, or they say, well, what's the next thing that we can do to carry this medium on? Because we see that it's gaining a lot of traction. So what's next? And that's, to me, is what is very interesting about the aspects of comic books. It's for the most part, it's been centered around the aspects of what's next, or what can we do, how can we reiterate a subject matter and take it to the next level. Deadpool is a really good example of this, okay? There's countless others, and I'll get into that on Wednesday more specifically. But to rein in and wrap up here, and get to the focal point here, Deadpool in itself, you have this character that really breaks down the expectations of what a superhero, for the most part, is supposed to be. Because, it was established a superhero does this, a superhero looks like this, and there you go. Now that, before Deadpool came out, there was, alterations, tweaking, and, you get like the anti-hero, you get, the concept of justice and protection, and it's gray and everything else. So when you think about Batman and the subject matter and other concepts, but when the comic book, what Deadpool in itself came out, it was very interesting because that comic book was not only wittily making fun of pop culture, Deadpool in itself would break down the concept of the fourth wall. The fourth wall, for itself is something that was very disturbing to break down. When it was initially, when it was first done, I would say it was probably, now I'm just merely going on from what I understand, and y'all, movie buffs or TV buffs, what have you, y'all can correct me and fill me in on it by emailing me or making comments with this episode. So there was one Hitchcock film where this was done to be very menacing, okay? And for those who know, and for those who don't know, I'm trying to think about what it was. But anyway, I'm just gonna set up the what the scene is. So initially, it's a scene where people are watching tennis, right? And everybody's moving their head back and forth because they're watching a tennis match, okay? But there's one person in the crowd that's just looking straight on at someone to antagonize them, to know that there's something amiss and there's something going to happen. That was, from what I understand, was the first, interplay of the aspects of breaking that down. And then, the fourth wall became a thing where it's comic relief, when you saw it in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It was reiterated again in other films. And then in television, Will Smith in the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, he did it a lot in the show. Now, doing that in a comic book that's a whole other thing, because in a comic book, you don't have something moving in order to, break it up a little bit. It's just there in the pages, and you're like, oh wow, okay. And it can be jarring, if you're not really, if that's not really something that's interesting to you. But it was just another aspect of how that's very interesting, and that's can be very reassuring with the aspects of what comic books can do, because it's another platform that entertains the aspects of thinking about what can you do next with telling a story. And then what can you do next with the aspects of art and the disposition of popular culture, of how people see themselves with popular culture, or how people see themselves in the aspects of modernity, how people see themselves in the aspects of nostalgia, how people feel about nostalgia, all the aspects of how people think about violence, justice, and the concept of science and technology, the concept of superheroes and their placement in comic books, or you're taking it to another level with the aspects of something like Tales from the Crypt, and that concept, the aspects of the subject matter, where it has to do with what you do, and reality of situation. This is a very spiritual thing. This can also be a very Christian connotation, but the aspects of this can be like an interpretation of a lot of different religions. Of you get your comeuppance, whether you realize that or not. When you do misdeeds, it eventually comes back to you. But it's laid in the concept of horror and monsters and ghouls, reiterating that, and that's very interesting. So that's my first thoughts about the aspects of the comic books, and the aspects of the first comic book, internationally, and then the American comic book that is considered to be the first comic book. So I would like to know what you all think. Feel free to reach out to me and continue the conversation. Your email is great, and also comments on YouTube is greatly appreciated. So this reaches the end of the Heartbeat Light. Tune in, turn up, and absolutely take care. Bye bye for now.